If you were to travel back in time 77 million years ago, in what is today the western reaches of North America, you would find yourself in a world of warm, swampy woodland. Dense greenery, composed of conifers and ginkgoes, would have stretched far and wide, while underfoot, marshy ground belonging to a vast floodplain created sludgy pools and stagnant bogs. This warm and watery world was part of the Dinosaur Park formation, and was a very different site to the pine forests and plains that cover most of modern-day Alberta, Canada, in which this land once sat. Throughout these conifer swamps, eerie, echoing calls, reminiscent of the sounds made by a trombone, periodically carried out through the green-tinted gloom, telltale signs of abundant dinosaur life. Specifically, these sounds were made by Corythosaurus, a genus of large crested hadrosaur that has become very well known to science in the years following its discovery. Today, we will be trudging into the swamp forests that Corythosaurus called home to meet this dinosaur face to face. We will be taking a look at how this animal adapted to the life it led, what it really looked like, and how it came to be known to science, along with much more. So join us as we come face to face with Corythosaurus, the musician of the Cretaceous marshes. Corythosaurus was a member of a group of highly successful herbivorous dinosaurs that dominated most regions throughout the late Cretaceous. These were known as the hadrosaurs. Hadrosaurs were adaptable animals that were just as at home in warm, swampy forests as they were in the scorching deserts, cool tundra plains, and tropical islands, depending on the species. And Corythosaurus is a particularly well-known member of the family. More specifically, this dinosaur was a lambeosaurine hadrosaur, which were characterized by their elaborate head crests. They were often large animals, and Corythosaurus is thought to have been capable of reaching just under 8 or 9 meters, or between 25 to 30 feet in length. Two species are known to science. The type species, Corythosaurus casuarius, which was named in 1914, and a second species discovered a few years later, Corythosaurus intermedius, named in 1923. This latter species is most likely valid, but it is not accepted by every paleontologist in the field. In life, Corythosaurus would have been a tall and imposing animal, yet its skull was, at first glance, almost disproportionately small in comparison to the rest of its body. Atop its head sat its characteristic bony crest, which was hollow, save for a series of passages that helped to carry sound when the animal called out. Within the crest, these passages split, first into separate chambers and then reuniting into one large central chamber, which led back down into the respiratory system. The crest would have acted like an echo chamber, projecting the dinosaur's calls into the woodlands when trying to communicate, but we'll explore that in greater detail later. The size and shape of Corythosaurus's crest have led some scientists to liken its skull's appearance to that of a modern cassowary, large birds native to Oceania and Southeast Asia, with tall and tough, cask-like structures on their heads. In fact, the name Corythosaurus means helmet lizard. Unlike most hadrosaurs, Corythosaurus's mouth was narrow with a tubular snout that was covered with a keratinous bill. This bill could be used for clipping vegetation from the branches of trees, before a battery of tough and replaceable teeth ground down the food at the back of the mouth. At the end of the snout, what appears to be nostrils were located. these are in fact links to the air passages and chambers within the dinosaur's crest, with the real nostrils being located just above the dinosaur's eyes. Fossilized skin impressions belonging to Corythosaurus indicate that this dinosaur was covered in polygonal scales, which varied greatly in size across its body. Some were tall, tough and bumpy. Others were tiny, fitting into an intricate network of folds across the animal's body. But despite the fact that these fossils exist, scientists do not yet know the color of Corythosaurus, as pigment cells have not been preserved within. The dinosaur's body was deep and tall, yet narrow, with tall dorsal spines that increased the overall height of the torso. Its forelimbs were thin and relatively short in comparison to the large hind limbs. And while Corythosaurus would have spent much of its time on 4 legs, it may have been comfortable rearing up on its hind limbs to feed, and when it needed to run. This also echoes what has been seen in other dinosaurs, such as the related Parasaurolophus, which we've covered recently on this channel. This dinosaur first came to the attention of scientists when a near-complete skeleton was unearthed in 1911 by accomplished American paleontologist Barnum Brown. Brown, also fondly known as Mr. Bones in the paleontological world, was also the first to discover a series of other legendary dinosaurs, including none other than Tyrannosaurus rex. Brown's Corythosaurus find, though discovered along the banks of the Red Deer River in Alberta, was preserved with most of the dinosaur's skin intact. When the dinosaur had died, it had become buried quickly by sediment. Most of this sediment would be carbonaceous clay, which stopped the skin from decomposing as the remains were preserved over time. Essentially, Brown had stumbled across the holy grail of dinosaur fossils. Only 60 centimeters or 2 feet from the end of the tail was missing, and the front legs were fragmentary, likely eroded away over the millennia. Carefully, Brown collected his find and brought it to the American Museum of Natural History, where it can be viewed by the general public today, on display in their original articulated poses. A second specimen of what appeared to be the same dinosaur was discovered, again by Brown alongside his colleague Peter Kaizen in 1914. In the same year, Brown described and named his find as Corythosaurus casuarius, assigning a name that referred to both the helmet-like crest atop the dinosaur's head and its superficial resemblance to a modern-day cassowary. However, these would not be the only Corythosaurus specimens collected by scientists over the years, and to this day, over 20 individual Corythosaurus skulls are known to science. Though there are some, such as the immaculately preserved duo discovered by Charles H. Sternberg, that were sadly lost in 1916, when the ship transporting them across the Atlantic to the British Museum of Natural History was struck by a German merchant raider during World War I. Down went the ship and its crew, and the fossils with them, never to be seen again. In 1920, however, Charles H. Sternberg's son, Levi Sternberg, discovered a Corythosaurus skull along another stretch of the Red Deer River, but this one was a little different to those that had been discovered prior. The crest was a slightly different size and shape to the Corythosaurus specimens on record so far, and it was discovered in rocks that were slightly younger, yet still within the Campanian stage of the late Cretaceous period. These new remains will be described as Corythosaurus intermedius in 1923 by William Parks, but not everyone supported the establishment of this new species. Some, such as Peter Dodson, who studied the fossils in 1975, noted that the differences in the crests of the two species may have instead been indicative of sexual dimorphism, where male and female animals can look rather different to one another. It may also have been a younger individual with a less well-developed crest. Most paleontologists, however, interpret Corythosaurus intermedius as a valid species, though it may indeed have been a separate species that survived ever so slightly later into the Campanian than Corythosaurus casuarius. Other proposed species of this genus did not fare so well. Corythosaurus bicrestaceus, Brevicrestaceus excavatus, and frontalis, which were all proposed between 1923 and 1935, are now all considered invalid. Instead, they are all thought to represent Corythosaurus casuarius specimens at different stages of their life cycle. Corythosaurus's most striking feature, its tall, dome-shaped crest, has long since been the topic of scientific discussion. Theories as to why this dinosaur had such a crest have been flowing in following its initial discovery, and they have ranged from the idea that it acted as an air storage to allow the animal to dive underwater, to the possibility that it may have been used to push foliage out of the way as it traversed through the woodlands. Both of these hypotheses have now been rejected in favor of the theory that Corythosaurus used its crest to project sound out into the swamp forests to communicate with members of the same species. As sound traveled through the tubes and chambers of Corythosaurus's crest, it was amplified and thus may have been used to make deep, mournful cries, reminiscent of the sound made by a brass instrument. In this way, as the dinosaur exhaled, a series of warnings and signals could be blasted out into the forest, for example, to alert any fellow Corythosaurus to danger, or to indicate where the best browsing material may be. Lambeosaurine hadrosaurs in particular seem to have been very well suited to producing these elaborate sounds, which may have been lower than 400 Hz, to make them spread faster and further throughout their environment. Higher and sharper sounds don't tend to travel as fast, and will be ineffective at signaling in this way. Another leading theory on the function of this dinosaur's crest is that it was brightly coloured and may have been used in mating displays or as visual signals to members of the same species. Perhaps during mating season, male Corythosaurus with bright, striking patterns adorning their crests would have gathered to display to females. Maybe the males with the brightest or the largest crests would have been more favourable to mate with, and these animals were able to pass their genes down to the next generation. Alternatively, if the crest was indeed brightly coloured, it may have served as a tool to display to predators, indicating that Corythosaurus was more dangerous than it perhaps really was. The idea that Corythosaurus was semi-aquatic came in tandem with studies on its hoof-like feet, which appeared to be webbed with skin that would have helped the animal to swim. Instead, scientists now recognize this as a form of natural padding that protected the animal's digits as it walked. The same structures are found on many species of modern mammals, and it would seem that dinosaurs had convergently evolved the very same adaptations, helping them to safely amble through the prehistoric woodlands in which they lived. Rather than swimming and diving to obtain its food then, Corythosaurus preferred to wander through the woodlands, in search of the juiciest needles from conifer trees. One Corythosaurus casuarius specimen is actually known to have had its stomach contents preserved in the fossilization process, meaning that scientists know exactly what the species preferred to eat. In this animal's belly was a series of selectively browsed conifer needles, as well as fresh seeds, twigs, and fruits. It seems to have deliberately selected the freshest and youngest leaves from the branch, meaning that it was likely a specialized feeder and preferred a specific diet. This picky diet, while suitable for the dinosaur at the time, may have actually been its downfall. When the conditions eventually changed towards the end of the Campanian, and the swamp forests began to disappear, Corythosaurus may not have been able to adapt as such a picky eater, eventually dying out as resources dwindled. As well as yielding well-preserved adult specimens, several Corythosaurus youngsters have been unearthed from the Dinosaur Park Formation, giving scientists an insight into how these animals grew and developed over time. Juvenile Corythosaurus seem to have had less well-developed crests than those of their adult counterparts, meaning that they were not as adept at producing the loud, low-frequency sounds projected by their parents. The crests instead seem to have begun developing when the dinosaurs reached maturity. At this time, the young would have been about half the size of an adult Corythosaurus, and may have still relied upon them for protection. Some dinosaurs unearthed from the Dinosaur Park Formation, such as the hadrosaur Tetragonosaurus, have actually been found to have been juvenile specimens of Corythosaurus, rendering their genera invalid. Corythosaurus was certainly a common and successful species in these warm and marshy woodlands. Corythosaurus's fossils are, so far, endemic to what would one day become Alberta, Canada, in both the Oldman and the Dinosaur Park formations. The rocks containing their fossils have been dated to roughly 77 million years ago at their oldest, and just over 75.5 million years ago at their youngest. The dinosaur thrived in a lush, green world, dominated by the wooded wetlands we have been exploring throughout today's video. But what else lived here? Well, it's called the Dinosaur Park Formation for a good reason, and this site has yielded many extremely well-preserved specimens of large, prehistoric reptiles which lived alongside Corythosaurus. One of the most common dinosaurs which Corythosaurus would have encountered would have been the large ceratopsian Centrosaurus. With a tough beak, tall, angular frill, and a single conical horn on its nose, this was a relative of the legendary Triceratops that was not yet to evolve in North America at this time. At roughly 5.5 meters or 18 feet in length, it was not as large as Corythosaurus, but was readily able to defend itself from the dangers of these dark and primal forests. Those dangers came primarily in the form of tyrannosaurids. Both Gorgosaurus and Daspletosaurus are known from the Dinosaur Park Formation, and both are species that specialized in crushing bone with their immensely powerful bite forces. Even adult Corythosaurus would need to be wary when these two genera were on the prowl. Fellow hadrosaurs lived in these woods as well, in the form of the famous Parasaurolophus, as well as the slightly lesser known Gripposaurus. Diverse species of ankylosaurs were native to Dinosaur Park as well, such as Edmontonia and Euplocephalus, both of which were extremely well armored with ossified spikes and domes respectively. Amongst the undergrowth, Sornornitholestes, a genera of small and agile dromaeosaurs, would have stalked small reptiles and mammals, while various species of turtles drifted through the murky swamps. Corythosaurus is one of the most famous hadrosaurs on account of its great degree of preservation in the fossil record, but it is one of many. Hadrosaurs can typically get overlooked in paleomedia due to their lack of impressive weaponry or armor. But these animals were among the most well-equipped of their day to survive the dangers of the Cretaceous. Even after Corythosaurus's extinction, hadrosaurs would dominate many Mesozoic environments, establishing themselves as some of the most dominant herbivores in the world, right up until our planet's fateful encounter with the KPG asteroid 66 million years ago.